Lakeland Currents, your public affairs program for North Central Minnesota. Production funding for Lakeland Currents is made possible by Bemidji Regional Airport, serving the region with daily flights to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. More information available at bemidjiairport.org. Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, friends. I'm Jason Edens, your host of Lakeland Currents. Thanks for joining the conversation today, and thanks for your ongoing support of Lakeland Public TV. We talk a lot about inclusivity these days, but does everyone really have a voice or a seat at the table? Oftentimes in community conversations and within decision-making circles, we see the proverbial usual suspects, those committed folks who have the ways and means to lean in and participate time after time. But whose voices are we not hearing or even neglecting? Well, the Beltrami Area Resiliency Team is working to ensure that everyone's voice is heard through an initiative called 100 Cups of Coffee. Here to help us understand this initiative, its intent, and its findings are my four guests, Dr. Anna Carlson, Joe Boudreau, Mary Fairbanks, and Wendy Thompson. Thank you all so much for making time for the conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm curious, what's the origin story of 100 Cups of Coffee? Was there an incident or an event that kind of catalyzed this initiative?
I'm the director at Beltrami Area Service Collaborative, and we support the well-being of family and children. And there is a statewide initiative going on called A More Resilient Minnesota. So as a part of that, we had a community conversation, and I know that Joe attended that, and that was in July 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to say a little bit more about what we experienced there, Joe.
Well, we had, I believe, 75 to 80 people, and there were different people from the community, stakeholders, if you will, in different organizations, from the schools, from Sanford Health. And so we all did some brainstorming. It was a day of some mini workshops. They had pulled in a couple of speakers that were doing similar work. I remember a gentleman from South Minneapolis. And so we continued. It's been slow, but we've from that date, we've come a long ways, actually. And it seems like it's kind of hard to believe that 2 years went by.
The group really challenged us to find more people to be involved in the conversation too. We looked around the room, and as you said, it was the usual suspects that we had around us. And we recognized as a group that we are really missing voices that need to be a part of the solution. So that community conversation, they really challenged us, and they said, we need a group that is going to figure out how to bring those voices to the table. So it was an exciting challenge for us to get. And that's how the resiliency team formed, was around that challenge.
I want to follow up on that, because one of the questions I've been eager to ask you all is, why is it that some voices are ignored or not a part of our community conversation?
One of the findings that we found in the 100 Cups of Coffee interview was what you talk about, what we call is looking for connection or a lack of connection within the community. And so that I believe that speaks to what you're saying, is voices not being at the table. And I know organizations try to reach out, but I think there is mistrust amongst some of our community members in the sincerity in that, because sometimes you get to the table and your voice isn't always listened to. And so I think there's that mistrust is in the community, and we saw some of that in through the interviews. And it's hard to connect with people that don't have that trust. And so they may pull away from the community and not want to be involved.
I want to ask you all about a quote that I read on your website. It's at the very end of the presentation that you share. And if I'm not mistaken, it says, we can't go back to sleep. We need to forge ahead through transformation. In what way are we asleep?
That is an excellent question. I think there's many ways that we have become whether it's asleep or numb or not aware of a lot of different issues that surround ourselves, our families, our communities every day. And through this conversation, through these 100 cups of coffee, I think what Mary was speaking to when we would hear the lack of trust or the lack of connection, at the heart of what this process did was to build relationships with people and really get to know them on a more personal level, not just kind of getting input, but really in the process itself, building those connections, not just the end of the process being, okay, now we're going to figure out how to build those connections. It was all baked right into the process. And so as we heard these stories and built these relationships, you start to become more aware of other people's realities and other people's experiences. And I think in that way, we can't go back to sleep where our ears are open, our eyes are open, our hearts are open, to respond to what we're hearing and seeing from our community.
How did you decide who to interview, and who were some of the folks that you interviewed who may not typically have an opportunity to chime in, if you will?
Well, so I wasn't part of the interview process. I was interviewed by Wendy. And so there were times when she interviewed me, a lot of those questions were really thought provoking about, what, as myself, as being part of this community, where my place would be and what my wants and what I view as community, and in going forward with this work, with that in mind, what can we do to make those things change to so that we don't go back to sleep and we don't have, I call them, the stale gatherings and conversations. And I've heard that so often that, things come and go, but there's a part of me that believes in this work that, it'll sustain.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those questions that were asked were kind of particular with that, with honed in on me as a community member, but it would across the board, it was, very, like I said, thought provoking.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about how you selected the groups that you did in order for them to participate in these conversations. So can you tell us anything more about who was selected to be interviewed?
I can tell you about my connections. I came to the resiliency team through an invitation through Peacemaker Resources. I'm on the board of directors there, and Barb Haug. I believe she was a sponsor of they were a sponsor of the original conversation event. And so she invited the board members to, if they were interested in becoming part of the resiliency team. And my joining that team, I bring some connections in the community that I've participated in over the years. I'm a public health nurse and have been practicing in tribal communities and BSU with my students for a long time. And so I have connections with different groups in the community focused, education and, a lot of the service organizations. And so and serving people in those organizations, their clients, their patients. So that was kind of a natural connection for me to say, well, I can connect you with people that are served by them, or members of a group I'm part of, such as I'm on the district curriculum committee. I'm also a member of the local Indian education committee. I'm a tribal member. So it was really natural for me to have an ability to connect with Native Americans in the community. And I think we recognize that those are voices that are not often at the table.
So if I sat down with one of your interviewers, what type of questions would I hear? Can you share some of the actual content of the cups of coffee conversation?
We started off by asking people about what they thought the values were of our community. And then we moved on to some thought-provoking questions, as Joe said. Things like, if you could imagine a place in the community that would support wellness, what would that place look like? What would it be? And those types of questions to get them thinking and imagining what is missing and what they would like, and what strengths we have that we can build off of in the community. So I think there were 13 questions that we went into, and all of our interviewers were trained as to how to present to each of their interviewees to kind of make sure that they were comfortable and that they understood that their answers would be confidential. They wouldn't be tied to a given person's name. We kept track of all the people we interviewed, but we didn't connect their name with their answers. So that left them more open to really sharing their experience in the community.
Well,
One of the
please.
questions that I really appreciated, and I appreciate that has continued to be asked in our presentations and continued outreach, is what's something you know that you wish other people in your community knew and paid attention to? And I think to me that question really gets at a lot of value, including like we know that you have a particular viewpoint, you have particular experience, expertise that we really would love for you to share if with others that you might think don't know what's going on in your world. So I really appreciated that question and continue to appreciate hearing people's responses to that question.
And what type of responses did you get to that question?
For that particular question, there was an emphasis on the existence and experience of racism in our community, the mental health needs in our community, homelessness in our community, the need for understanding to establish empathy and common ground were really some common things that were experiences and reflections of people interviewed that was shared throughout this process in the report.
Yeah, I think connection was a big piece of that is, how can we come together with empathy, as Anna said, and be together, understand one another's stories, and how can we create welcoming environments that all people feel welcome. Another piece that came through was the need to learn about trauma and the impacts on the brain, and the need to learn about what resiliency is and what well-being is in our community. And that was another thing during our community conversation event that we had in 2019 that people said, if we were all speaking a common language about what it is to experience trauma and how that creates a fight, flight, or freeze reaction from people, that we would come together in a different way. So this isn't just about projects that we create, it's also just about how we are with one another when we gather.
Well, how do you all intend to use your findings? And do you think that what you've learned from this process will in some way, shape, or form be incorporated into decision-making going forward or community conversations going forward? How will this be used?
Some of the conversations we've had in our meetings is to make sure that the people that we talk about that aren't at the table would be leadership. In our community here, those are the people that hold public offices and spaces, and to make sure that when we get together, that there is a mix of people of all walks of life. In, like I said, leadership and people that are, and then even some of those people that that are homeless, and so that everybody is at the table and heard. Now, you can imagine a big, huge table, but it's a slow process. When our work is really, the pandemic didn't shut us down. We kept going, and then when things kind of eased up here over the winter, we started some momentum, and now we're at a place now where we have some really good things coming up, even for the summer projects and different things. Getting my employer, Sanford Health, involved.
So the 100 cups of coffee, is it still ongoing? Are you still interviewing community members?
We did complete 100 cups of coffee interviews in December, and you mentioned the last sentence on our report. So that is the report with all the findings from the 100 cups of coffee interviews. And so we aren't doing any more interviews. We're moving into exactly what you're asking. What are we going to be doing with this? And so we're talking about, we want to share the results. We told our interviewees that they would get a copy of the report, and as Joe said, we are inviting them to participate with us in ways that they feel comfortable to do that. And so we're still figuring out, we're not figuring out, I think we have some really good plans for sharing this on a community-wide basis, sharing it with the decision makers within organizations, so they can see these results and what would be helpful for them to be able to serve the community the best way they can, and making sure they're reaching out to everyone that uses their services and understands, what their situations are, and perhaps even adopting the cups of coffee model in accessing information from their constituents, from their customers, because I think we really learned a lot, and it was very empowering, I think, for people to participate. And so I can see this model being replicated again. So we have ideas, and right now we're in the process of raising awareness about the report, and hopefully garner more interest, kind of have some ripple effects of how that might be useful to those in the community, and certainly being there to support how they do that.
I'd like to share a kind of a unique way that I became involved with this, and how I see this team really as this dynamic, evolving process and team that's really exciting to be a part of, is because a couple of colleagues and I at Bemidji State University are working on a resilience plan, but it was kind of coming from a very different frame. Our president, Faith Hansrud, 2 years ago had signed a climate commitment that included not only reducing our carbon footprint, but looking at our actions within the community to build resilience. And so we started asking ourselves and our community members around us, what does this mean? What does resilience mean for our community? And was introduced to this Beltrami area resiliency team. And I think that the synergies that we've had in our conversations about how much our community needs and respects the environment and environmental issues, as well as each other, needing to understand how our relationships to the land, to the water, and to one another are really central in this concept of resilience. And so we've kind of been learning and evolving as we go with the various work being done in these spaces. And I think that's a really exciting thing to see happen and evolve through these partnerships and various conversations.
Should mention that one of the key findings, Wendy brought up what people found valuable, or what did they appreciate about the community. And one of the top items that came out was the connection to land and water that people feel about living in Bemidji and in Beltrami. So it's really cool having Dr. Carlson's project and her team come and talk to us about how the environment is also looking at, the environmental effort is looking at resilience in our community. So it's really a nice connection.
Mary, I want to follow up with something you said a moment ago about how some of your interviewees felt a sense of empowerment by being invited to be a part of this conversation. I'd like to know more about that. And I'd also like to know if there were any unexpected challenges in terms of reaching out and starting these conversations.
I think that just being asked to participate and understanding that their input was valuable, and to be able to do it in a one-on-one type of situation, in an interview with someone who was trained to do it, I think, and having that opportunity. And then once again, having these kinds of questions about what they think is important and what they think the community needs. And then getting this beautiful report at the end that shows that their words are there. I think, we didn't ask them if they were happy or satisfied with how it went, but I would think that it would be very empowering to be recognized that your voice is being listened to.
I even had a couple people who I was going to interview that said, I'm not sure if I have anything to share. And they were a little unsure of themselves. And then as we talked, the colorful answers that they had, and the input and the insight that I haven't heard before came out. And it was just very striking that they would have thought they didn't have something to share.
Interesting. What was the most memorable thing that you heard during your interviews?
I think one of the things was just the big heart that people have for one another. We're talking about tension. We're talking about, coming out of a pandemic, and there are a lot of things that people have conflict about, but just in talking to people how much we have in common and how much people want community and want connection. And some of the answers were really selfless. Like one of our questions was, what could the community do right now that would help you and your family? And they were hesitant to answer that one, but they really jumped in when we asked, what could the community do to help your friends and family? I think sometimes, there was an appreciation for, I have enough, but I'm worried about these people in my life. And it was it was just really a beautiful statement on their part to have that generosity.
Indeed. Well, a follow-up question for you, Wendy. The Beltrami Area Service Collaborative is related to the resiliency team, correct? The team is part of the collaborative. Is the collaborative part of the county? Who's behind this effort? Ultimately?
Actually, we are separate from the county. We have a board that's made up of different partners in the community who are concerned about family wellness and children's mental health, educational success. So we have the United Way, and all of the schools and mental health agencies in the county are part of that joint powers entity, which is BASC, Beltrami Area Service Collaborative. There are 90 collaboratives throughout the state. And as I mentioned before, there is a movement toward a more resilient Minnesota. But the resiliency team in Beltrami County, I gotta say, they're creating a lot of buzz in the state because they're moving so quickly with this idea. And I'm getting a lot of phone calls about how can we replicate this in other parts of the state to do the 100 cups. And so I'm just really proud of their work. We facilitate and they get out there and create the excitement and create the connection with people. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Thank you for the segue, because I was going to ask you if you're going to try and replicate this work elsewhere in the state. Tell me more about what you're hearing from communities, and how did those communities learn about your work here?
So I believe they learn through it through our collaborative meetings. We get together, the Department of Human Services facilitates the work of all those different collaboratives. So they kind of highlighted our work, and then the Minnesota Department of Health got wind of it as well. So that's how the word has gotten out about 100 cups. There are 2 other communities that have used it, but those 2 communities didn't do it in the same way. They interviewed leaders of the community, and we added the extra challenge of trying to find people who hadn't been at the table.
So was the 100, oh, I'm sorry, please, after you, Wendy.
Yeah, and so some of those collaboratives are reaching out and saying, could we use your materials to set this up? And we set up a whole procedure that we're sharing with them. So if they would like to move forward, they can do that and just spare them the work of reinventing the wheel.
So did you all generate this notion of 100 cups of coffee, or was it a particular theory of change or an existing model?
So an epidemiologist who worked for Minnesota Department of Health came up with the idea about 3 years ago, and she used it for a substance abuse community scan to find out what people were thinking about what needed to happen in order to reduce substance use in that particular community. And so the questions and the process were different, but we worked with her to kind of develop this for our area. And yeah, changed it up and kind of tailored it, working as a group. I think it took us 3 or 4 months, maybe longer, because we really wanted to do it right. We changed that up and made the questions relevant to our area and our mission with the resiliency team.
Well, we only have time for about 2 more questions here. One of which I'd like to hear from each of you, actually. If more communities were to facilitate these inclusive conversations and ensure that everyone's voice is heard, how would society be different in the future? What's your vision for how this can affect change in our communities? Starting with Dr. Carlson.
I think we'd have to slow down and listen and have a lot of compassion. I think that oftentimes in our society, decisions are made really quickly and often out of sight or out of mind from a large population in the community. And I think that it takes intention, and it takes slowing down, and it takes listening, and it takes leading with inquiry and curiosity and compassion. So those are the ways I see it changing, and I think that there's a lot of good that comes out of that. a lot of powerful transformation that comes out of doing all of those things.
Joe?
So I had been thinking that, you know, in this last year, of course, we've all been using the theme, we're in this together. And so truly, you know, worldwide, we were in this together. Unless you wanted to move to the moon or Mars, we were here. So I learned a lot through that, just for my own self, you know, in being in the community of Bemidji and what that would look like. And my vision for that was, you know, a blueprint. You know, we're about 15, 16,000 strong, but that's not really big, but it's, you know, even still small enough where we can make those connections. And so that those people that really have this passion, you know, to look at us and look at our community and who we are, that, you know, we are in this together. Now, the pandemic we're hoping is winding down, but we still are in this together. And we should never forget that, even with the things that went on last summer and in the fall, that were pretty much focused on trying to be divisive in different ways. And what happened in Minneapolis and things, we still are here and we're still together. And if I think we adopt that, what the pandemic showed us, that yes, we are in this together and we can sustain that.
Well said. Well, unfortunately, we're nearly out of time, and I just have one final quick question about something I learned on your website, the chickadee. Tell me how the chickadee has inspired this effort.
So we chose that for our logo because we learned that the chickadee is a very resilient breed. And I wish we had our person on who is the expert on the chickadee. So, but we found that chickadees help others too. I think that was the other piece of that as well. Does anybody else remember more about the story?
They're a nurturing bird, and they never go away. They stick around even in the cold.
And if I remember correctly, they nurture other species as well. And we'll be sure to direct people to your website. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for sharing your perspectives and for the work that you've done with the resiliency team.
Thank you.
And of course,
Thank
you for joining me today. I really appreciate
your attention to our work. It's really good to have this out there.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all of you for joining me once again. I'm Jason Edens, your host of Lakeland Currents. Be kind and be well. We'll see you next week.